You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
We've got a great show lined up for you today on the 7 signs you absolutely cannot ignore that shows your body is beginning to break down because of stress. So a lot of people know that we're stressed. A lot of people know that they go through bouts of stress in their life, but they don't really know how much it's beginning to add up. And that's one of the things that I'm teaching right now, really with the Integrative Health Practitioner certification, is allowing people to really look at someone during assessment and say, where is this person on the continuum for how quickly they're going to end up with some type of disease if they already don't have one? And that's because when you look at the body, when you look at the signs of stress, the body actually begins to break down in a very predictable manner. And we know that we can look at these certain signs, both physical and clinical symptoms, of a person that's under a great deal of stress and their body is no longer holding up to the same degree. That means that they've pretty much met the full, tolerance of their rain barrel, and they're beginning to now see what happens, the fruition of stress and how the body is beginning to break down. So what I want to give you today is really 7 easy signs to look for. Literally, anyone can do this. You don't necessarily have to be a practitioner. You don't have to go to a health coach. You don't have to go to a doctor in order to look for these and understand that you are showing either the first signs of stress or you're someone that's already met that tolerance. You're beginning to fill up the rain barrel. And we do it at this point, we have to watch out because it's at this point that a dis-ease can begin to get set in. And I gave that to you last week. So really, I went through the different signs of the body moving through the stress continuum. And that's why it's so important for me to teach these things. It's because most likely your doctor's not going to catch it. They haven't really been taught it, and they don't even understand how it's the sympathetic nervous system. It's the fight or flight based side of the autonomic nervous system, which is basically 2 branches. It's the fight or flight and the rest and relax. And our job in this crazy Western-based culture is to find as many activities as we can to calm this thing we call the sympathetic nervous system. Because as we begin to ramp up the sympathetic nervous system, again, a lot of naturopathic doctors know this, a lot of integrative health practitioners know this, but the medical system is not teaching this in school. So what do we have? Well, we have the majority of people, because the majority of the people go to see their MD, they go to see their conventional medicine doctor. That's not an integrative doctor. They're not practicing functional medicine. They're not practicing naturopathic medicine or bioregulatory medicine, and they're not looking at the body as a whole. Meaning they're not looking how different things are interconnected, and they're not saying to someone like, listen, you're beginning to show signs of stress intolerance. Your body is no longer holding up to the degree that it should. So what I want to do right now is I actually just want to get right into these. I want to tackle this. And that's because I did a show not too long ago. It was episode 788 called The 10 Telltale Signs of a Coming Disease. And I actually gave some of the physical signs, and I would love you to go back and check out that show. But I went over those, such as that crease on the earlobe. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, you have to check out that show for all the different signs of things like heart disease and thyroid. So absolutely check out that show. That was episode 788. And today I'm going to stick with the episode and the topic of stress and what it does to the body. Very predictable, very systematic. And that's why for me, it's just, having seen many thousands of people, it's no longer difficult to say, hey, this person right now, listen, we're all under stress. I know that. I no doubt about it. Like, there are parts of our life that are going to be stressful. But where are you in terms of your tolerance to stress? Like, how deep are you into this? So let's get right into it. The very first one that I want to talk about, and again, I'm teaching this. That's why this topic came up. Because in the Integrative Health Practitioner certification, on the 4th module is stress. And as we went through that, I was teaching people to look for clinical signs of coming dis-ease in the body, beginning with stress and the sympathetic nervous system. Now, again, the sympathetic nervous system simply means that your body is moving into a fight or flight survival-based mode. And when that happens, one of the repercussions of that is an increased heart rate. Now, the heart rate increases not by accident. What happens is your body actually tells it to do that. So when you perceive stress, the hypothalamus inside of the brain tells the pituitary gland to tell the adrenals to produce something called catecholamines. Now, an easier way to say that is just your body begins to produce what? Adrenaline. And you probably heard of adrenaline before, or norepinephrine. That's our body's ability or the way to start to increase body temperature, to increase blood flow, oxygenation, opening up the lungs, and it increases the heart rate. So we know that if it's doing that, because again, your body should be in a normal heart rate, like a normal beats per minute for just a well-conditioned, normal, healthy human being in the 50s or 60s. So 50 to 70, 69, we'll say, beats per minute. And how can you check that? Well, you can simply take your pulse. You can use any fancy gadget you want to take your pulse. But to be honest, my favorite way to do it is just those $20 oximeters that lets you know your blood oxygen level. You put it right over your index finger. And I'll link it up in the show notes today. You can buy them anywhere. But I'll link it up today. Today's episode 1005, I believe. So StephenCabral.com/1005. Now, here's the nice thing, is you should take your heart rate in the morning when you first wake up. If it's not in the 50s to 60s, that's at the lowest it's really going to be for the day. So when you wake up, if it's not in the 50s or 60s, especially before bed as well, the two most important times to take it, in the morning when you wake up and right before bed. Because during those times, you should be in just the full parasympathetic nervous system. That means the rest and relax. Because if you're not, that means you're not tapping into body fat. That means you're not rejuvenating the body. That means you're going to end up with blood sugar-based dysregulation potentially. A lot of issues can come from this. And again, this is when genetics matter. Genetics only matter if you've met your total toxic load or total body burden. If your body can't deal with stress or gut issues or infections or viruses or heavy metals, whatever it is, or maybe it's multiple, that's when genetics matter, but it doesn't matter until then. That's when it matters. So this is really important because this is something very easy to test. And I'm not talking about when you're working if your heart rate's in the 70s or above. I'm talking about at rest. So if you're sitting at your desk and you keep on this oximeter, you can actually see when you're beginning to get stressed. It's pretty amazing. I mean, I love heart rate variability monitors. I love a lot of things like that. Don't get me wrong. I love all these gadgets. But an oximeter is something that you can literally put on your finger and it tells you exactly what your heart rate is, beats per minute, and it's very accurate. I would love to say a lot of these smartwatches are as accurate as it, but they're not. There's a lot of movement. They don't stay in place properly. So again, get yourself one of those $20 oximeters. I'll link it up today. You can get them anywhere in the world and pretty simple. Okay, so heart rate monitor or increased heart rate is a sign of sympathetic nervous system because the heart rate increases due to either infection, viruses, or some type of stress load with the adrenals producing more catecholamines. But remember, we blame the adrenals for a lot of issues, but it's honestly never the adrenals' fault. The adrenals get signals from your brain, and the brain is perceiving some type of stress. So always remember, the adrenals are not the thing necessarily to fix. You can give them a boost, you can certainly help them, but really what we need to fix is the brain. All right, or the mind, I should say. Number 2 is this. The second sign I do not want you to ignore is this, and that is lowered body temperature. Again, you get yourself a thermometer. You can use one of the air-based ones. I don't love the temperature-based ones, but the one that I recommend does both temperature and the air. I recommend just using the air. Certainly, you could do it under your tongue. I have a really nice one, a couple $100 one for my practice, but you don't need that really at home. You can buy the $20 or $30 one that is used for the air. Really simple. So why does this matter? Well, again, you can test yourself in the morning when you wake up and then before bed. And your body temperature should be in the 98s. So it should be 98.6, and that's Fahrenheit. So for Celsius, I don't know the conversion. I should know the conversion, and I'm sure I can find that out pretty quick with a little Google search here. But why don't I type that in? 98.6 Fahrenheit to Celsius. All right. It's 37 degrees Celsius. So it should be around 37 degrees. Now, the reason I say that is your temperature can actually be anywhere in the 98s. So that's 36.66 in Celsius to 37.2. Okay, so now you have it. If it's below 36.6 or above 37.2, that means that there's some type of, if it's above, that means there's some type of infection. The immune system's working to a harder degree. What I'm really looking for is because of stress, chronic stress. And again, we're talking about chronic stress right now. This body temperature would begin to fall. It would begin to be in the 97s, potentially even 96s. I even work with people in my practice where it's below 95. That is years typically of chronic stress. So that's going to take a little longer to heal. It's okay. You can still heal without a doubt, but it's going to take just a little bit more because your body's in such a deep state of chronic stress, more so that it's in the later stages where the body's trying to heal itself. It's really in that deep, slower metabolic rate zone. So you know that if your heart rate's increased and your body temperature is lower, it's going to be challenging to burn body fat. I mean, it really is. You're not in a state of being able to tap into of just oxygenated and fat lipolysis to break down body fat. You're in more of a fight or flight where your body prefers to use glycogen and glucose. So just keep that in mind. It's really important that if you are trying to lose weight, that we go back to getting the body healthy. So really important here. Let's go into this next one. Lower body temperature. One more thing I want to say about this, because people always say, well, isn't that a sign of hypothyroidism? It absolutely is. If your body temperature starts to drop, you could be becoming hypothyroid or low thyroid. Now, what does that mean? Well, same thing. It means lowered metabolic rate. You are looking at someone whose metabolism is beginning to go lower and lower. Could you end up with something like Raynaud's, or could you end up with something like poor overall circulation, cold hands and feet, more of a blue tint to the lips, reddish nose? Absolutely. We're looking at poor circulation. We're looking at a deep conservatory issue with the body holding on to that blood deeper into the core. So just, really, really important sign to look for. When you wake up in the morning, make sure your body temperature is between 98.0 and 98.9. That's really what you're looking at. And most thermometers are doing somewhere in the 0.2 range, at least in terms of Fahrenheit. So 98.0 to 98.8, we're essentially looking at. And again, 98.6 is kind of our gold standard. But, for many, many years, I've been looking at people's body temperature inside my practice, and I would say only about 1 out of 10 people are 98.6, but the majority, of course, healthy people are somewhere within that continuum as well. All right, number 3 is this. This you might maybe guess, but high blood pressure. High blood pressure is absolutely a sign of stress. Absolutely. Now, can it be in a mineral imbalance? Of course it can, and here's why. So if you think about this, again, let's go back to the fight or flight. When your body perceives stress, and again, it's perceived because we're the one who decides if it's stress. Now, you might say like, okay, running late for work or you got into an accident or something like that is stress. I would agree with you, but it's still our perception and reaction to stress. So what I'm saying is anything that you react to stressfully, like literally anything, a movie, whatever, is stress. And it's your brain now telling this thing called the HPA axis. It's just your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. I won't repeat that every time for people that aren't into it. Is that, okay, first we produce the catecholamines, which is the adrenaline. But your body then also produces cortisol. When you produce cortisol, you get that feedback loop to the brain. Now we're in a survival-based state. Well, what happens is something called arterial-based constriction. You're getting ready to fight. You are raising that blood pressure, and your body's getting pumped up. Like you are ready to tackle or run away. Whatever the call, whatever the need is, you are ready. And another thing happens, which is very, very interesting, and I learned about this when I had POTS many, many years ago, is that your body in the acute phase, your kidneys actually signal to store or to hold on to sodium. Why would it hold on to sodium? Well, sodium is a very easy way if you increase it in the bloodstream in order to increase blood pressure. And that's why when you have high blood pressure, a lot of MDs will give you diuretics, and they'll give you things to basically increase urinary flow, increase sodium depletion. But that's really, again, a Band-Aid approach. And that's because as aldosterone is high, and again, hardly anyone even looks at aldosterone or looks at cortisol. If you have high blood pressure, they just say, oh, well, you have high blood pressure, so let's give you a calcium channel blocker, which I can explain that as well, a beta blocker, diuretics. And the reason those work is because, well, calcium helps get you into the sympathetic nervous system. Magnesium is which blocks the sympathetic nervous system, and potassium is what pushes the parasympathetic nervous system. So when we look at that, well, when you increase aldosterone, you actually hold on to sodium and spare potassium. You start to remove potassium. Well, in the long run, that's a disaster, right? Because that could absolutely lead to high blood pressure. Now, does that mean taking in salt is going to be bad for you if you have high blood pressure? Well, certainly if you're still in a stress-based state because it's further increasing sodium. But it's not salt's fault. Don't blame salt for high blood pressure. That's not how it works. Even if you're genetically predisposed to retaining fluid because of sodium intake, it's still the environment you put your body in. So again, let's not blame salt. Now, we can blame table salt. That's certainly not a great thing for you with all the aluminum and bleach in it. But if you're talking about Himalayan sea salt or Celtic sea salt or, the flat beds of sea salt, the beds in Utah called real salt, Redmond's real salt, that's not to blame. I mean, let's not go overboard here. You can certainly salt your food too much, but that is not the cause of this. We're looking at some type of sympathetic nervous system issue. There's a lot of things that go on with high blood pressure. But if you're not looking at a hair tissue mineral analysis and you're not looking at a thyroid adrenal hormone test, you're most likely not going to find the culprit. And so that I just can't recommend that obviously enough. Now, the way that you get POTS though is that you can have high blood pressure in the beginning, high cortisol, and then all of a sudden your body just crashes and aldosterone falls and your body can't respond the same way. And so now you're not actually holding on to sodium, you're dumping sodium. And so you get lightheaded upon standing, you feel weak, you can't regulate heart rate because, again, your heart rate and heart palpitations, which I should have put on here, it's another sign of stress. Increased heart rate, why don't we call it heart palpitations as well, is that your body, you get the fluttering of the heart. You can actually, so if you can hear your heart beat, like you're in a sign, literally, your electrolytes are off. And that's calcium balanced to magnesium, and it's sodium balanced to potassium. It's so important. Run a hair tissue mineral analysis. You can run your blood work. That's great as well, but it's not going to tell you the details of a hair tissue mineral analysis or the thyroid adrenal hormone. So really important labs. Again, that's why we run those all the time, because you get to see the deeper underlying root causes that blood work could never tell you, never in a million years. That's the interesting thing is there's a lot of functional medicine doctors out there, and they're doing amazing work. But if you're only running blood work, you're never going to solve the puzzle. You can't. Blood's a homeostatic fluid. It really is. Things have to go really wrong in order for your blood work to be off. You have to test the urine, the saliva, the stool, and the other things as well. You can test the hair. You can test all these great things. They're all going to give you data points. And again, I don't ignore the blood. I use blood work in my practice as well. I do an annual review, and then if something's wrong, I do quarterly reviews with the blood work. But I never let that. That's like 6th or 7th on my list. I've got the Dr. Ball Big 5 first. Then I'll look at stool testing. And then if there's no gut-based issues, well, then I'll do blood work instead. I want to look at those. But if someone comes in with an issue, trust me, if they just say, I don't know what's wrong with me, my doctors don't know what's wrong with me, but here's all my symptoms. And I say, well, if your blood work looks decent, we need to look at the underlying root causes. And I think that only makes sense. Number 4 is this, high cholesterol. High cholesterol can absolutely be a sign of stress. Now, it could be a sign that you're taking in too much fructose. It can be a sign of other things as well. So I'm not going to deny that. But what I want to look at is this. High cholesterol can absolutely be because your body's in a state of stress. And as you begin to produce more adrenaline and catecholamines, we can also ramp up what's called catabolism in the body, more of a catabolic nature, because as cortisol starts to get produced, your body's going to look to your liver to produce glycogen. Now, it will start to tap into body fat in the beginning, but if fight or flight becomes increased and your heart rate becomes increased, your body no longer oxidizes fat at the same level, meaning fat oxidation is actually fairly slow. And it's great, and it's a nice slow fuel source, and that's why it works. You actually burn more body fat when you're going for a walk, a light jog, a light bike, when you're just kind of moving lightly, right? The percentage is larger. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do interval training because I'm a huge advocate, but you're not burning actually a greater percentage-wise when you're doing the intervals. You just boost your metabolism, so you're burning more later, and you're better able to utilize glucose. That's kind of like one of the missing pieces that a lot of people don't know about with interval-based training is because you're depleting glycogen levels as well, and then your body has to restore those glycogen levels in order before it starts to even use blood sugar for the rest of the body or even be able to use it for body fat. So again, interval training is absolutely phenomenal as well. But here's the deal. If you increase a catabolic state, your body will respond in turn. So what it will do is it will ramp up hormones. Now, in the beginning, it will ramp up DHEA, testosterone, and it will ramp up cortisol, and it will ramp up aldosterone, and ramp up a lot of hormones, dopamine, and a lot of neurotransmitters. Well, all of those things are great, except that it can cause tissue breakdown. Muscle tissue breakdown, it causes inflammation, it causes arterial-based damage. And what happens at this point is that your body can use cholesterol to actually patch up some of that arterial-based damage. But it can also do this. Cholesterol is the precursor to all those hormones I just named. So if you want to make more testosterone, if you want to make more cortisol or aldosterone or dihydroepiandrosterone, which is DHEA, then you need more cholesterol. And so what happens is your body will upregulate cholesterol production. And if you say, well, that can't happen because I don't take in that much cholesterol in my diet, well, you might be surprised that your liver actually makes 80% of all the cholesterol in your body. So whether you take it in or not, if you're under a great amount of stress, well, then you may just have high cholesterol show up on your lab work. So that's why, again, it's important to test. All right, number 5 is this, skin flare-ups. A lot of people get rashes. They get these strange rashes that they can't explain, or they get psoriasis as well. And these are absolutely a response from a heightened immune response. So a lot of them we look at as Th1-based immune responses, and we look at this heightened response to our environment or ourselves, our skin. So it can be from many different things. It can be from a ramping of what's called inflammatory cytokines. It's a prostaglandin series 6-based issue for some people. Too many omega-6s is certainly an issue. Taking in dairy and gluten, like that can be an issue for people. Histamines can be an issue for people. But also, a lot of people don't know this, but just stress alone, forget about the antibiotics, birth control, alcohol, ibuprofen, alcohol, etc. Stress in and of itself can cause intestinal permeability. Let me repeat that one more time. Stress, regardless of everything else, even the best diet in the world, can cause leaky gut. And what happens is those little intestinal gaps become larger. And as they become larger, well, food particles can begin to escape before they're fully broken down, and bacteria, and fats, and bacteria. But those can get into your bloodstream. And when they do, well, they can cause an immune-based reaction. Now, again, this is when genetics matter, right? For me, I'm not a psoriasis-based person. I'm an autoimmune in terms of rheumatoid arthritis. I've got type 2 diabetes, adrenal-based issues, allergies, etc. That's me. That's in my genetic code. You might get Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism or MS, or you might get psoriasis, right? So that's in your code. But again, it doesn't matter until we create the environment, right? So until we create the environment, the genetics don't necessarily turn on. And that's the basis of epigenetics. And we know that now because we know that the genes aren't that exciting. We don't have that many genes. It was like this very disappointing day when the human genome was fully decoded. But it was an exciting day when we learned about all these things called single nucleotide polymorphisms and how the majority of those are based on our lifestyle and our environment, whether we know it or not. Again, we could be living the best lifestyle, but if we have a lot of stress, well, it can still cause the intestinal permeability, which can cause the genetic issues that we're susceptible to. So, and again, this is called epigenetics. It's called single nucleotide polymorphisms, referred to as SNPs, and we have millions of those. So that's like a burgeoning, blooming field of study that we are looking into. But again, whether you ever look into it or not, it honestly doesn't matter. Like we go down rabbit holes on things that really have no bearing on our life. We need to get back to what really does matter, and that's decreasing this fight or flight, decreasing the sympathetic nervous system, healing our guts, and looking at all the different detoxification-based protocols we need to do, whether it's the heavy metal, the parasites, the SIBO, the candida, the liver-based detoxes, all of that. We need to remove the excesses because we live in a world of excess. You know, for most people listening to this podcast right now, if you have a smartphone and you're plugged in and you're listening to that, you most likely have access to food whenever you want it. And the problem with that is that you have food whenever you want it. And you have like everything that life could give you. And that's a great thing. I'm not saying that at all. Like, you know, there's a lot of people who would love to be in that position. But the problem is when we live in these Western-based cultures is that we're always accumulating. We're never removing. And if we're not removing, well, then we live and we suffer from the diseases of accumulation, which is really what we learned about this in ancient Egyptian, ancient Roman, ancient Greek-based times. It was the people who were wealthy that actually got all of the diseases of the accumulation, because those people who were, I don't even know the proper term for it, but the people who were doing a lot of the work, peasants, or I don't even know if that's the right name, but we'll just say a lot of the people who weren't wealthy, that they only had a meal or two a day, and it was very meager, and it wasn't these rich-based meals. They didn't suffer from the same diseases of the body that a lot of the wealthy did, who had access to lots of alcohol and rich meats and all of that stuff whenever they wanted it. So it's something to look into. I always find it very interesting because I do study longevity. I do study anti-aging. It's a field that is very important to me to help a lot of people in my practice to ensure that they live a long, healthy life. Because again, a lot of people I work with, they work super hard. They've raised families. They've done this. They've done that. And they should be able to now enjoy their life. You don't want to deal with joint-based pain and inflammation, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, all the things we're talking about right now. They eventually catch up with you. Look at them now. Make sure you're not suffering from these things. If you are, you know what you need to do. You need to begin to reverse this stress cycle. And I talk about the whole thing in the Rain Barrel Effect as well. And again, the book came out a couple months back, hit number 1 on Amazon, no advertising, no marketing. I don't say that from an ego-based perspective. It's just that this is information that we need. And again, I feel very comfortable trying to promote this book. And that's because 100% of all profit from that book goes to charity. And that's because I don't want to sell the information that I know will help people heal. All right, let's move on. Number 6 is this: IBS, IBD, which is irritable bowel syndrome, IBD, irritable bowel disease. But think of it this way. It's bloating. It's gas, it's discomfort, it's poor digestion, it's nausea, and also acid reflux a lot of people get as well. So GERD, acid reflux. Remember, these are caused, acid reflux, GERD, lower esophageal sphincter-based issues. You can't close the bottom of the esophagus very well. Sometimes lead to achalasia. It can lead to sometimes Barrett's esophageal-based issues. So these are all important things because acid production should be normalized, right? We shouldn't have histamine overproduction. We shouldn't have acid overproduction. We shouldn't have low acid production. We don't want to have low peristaltic movement, which means the food just sits there for hours longer than it should and then ferments and creates methane gas. We don't want stress as well, because what can happen is the ileocecal valve stays open, it malfunctions, and bacteria from our colon actually backfills. It goes up like a garbage disposal, literally gurgling back up into your sink. That's what can happen with your colon. When that happens, you actually give yourself SIBO. All that bacteria from your colon actually goes into your small intestine. If you've never heard that before, this is one of the reasons why we specialize in digestive-based issues. A lot of people don't know these things. You can actually give yourself SIBO. So important to know that, and it can happen through stress. That's why you can do all the Candida protocols, and we do. We literally help people get rid of the H. pylori, the Candida, the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and the parasites. They're gone. We can see them. The lab tests are gone. But every once in a while, like 1 out of 100 people, they still have bloating. They still have some nausea. Why? It goes back to the sympathetic nervous system and stress. And we know at that point that we've done the gut work. Now we need to really work on calming this person's nervous system, because you're not going to be able to get rid of all the irritable bowel issues if your brain and your gut are irritable, because there's something called the brain-gut axis or the gut-brain axis, and they talk to each other. And if you're anxious and you're stressed, well, your gut's going to feel that way as well, because there's going to be this slower peristaltic movement. There's going to be this overgrowth of bacteria, or it's just going to be food just sitting there for a lot longer than it should. Remember, everything that you have right now, every symptom is explainable. All that you need to do is just need to find it. That's it. You just need to find that answer you're looking for, and there's always an answer. I'm telling you that right now. There's always an answer. The last one is this. It's poor memory or forgetfulness. People say all the time, I can't even remember where my keys are. I forget everything. It's just I'm just getting older. No, it's not. It's not. But your body now has met its total toxic load or its total body burden, or you've simply filled up your rain barrel. Your body's not handling stress in the same way. Cortisol absolutely does affect brain cells, but keep in mind, if you're in the fight or flight, you're in tunnel vision, you're in tunnel mode. Your body's forgetting about the extraneous and focused at the task at hand if it believes it's truly in a fight or flight-based situation. So you have to remember that. But do keep in mind that chronic stress absolutely does break down the neural synapses in the brain. So it is one reason that leads to Alzheimer's. We know high cortisol levels burns out brain cells. High cortisol levels, remember, produced by the HPA axis, produced by the adrenals, produced by the adrenal cortex, burns out brain cells. High cortisol does that. And that's why we know products like Adrenal Soothe help the brain. You take 2 capsules at dinner, Take one at lunch if you want for a little extra. And what it does, it has in it what's called ashwagandha and phosphoserine. We know those two products does what? Well, it decreases cortisol. So if we can decrease cortisol, what can we do? Well, we can help the brain. We can help those neural synapses. We can help decrease overall chronic-based inflammation. This has all been studied, all been researched. It's been researched in Europe, in Canada, in the US. Like there are many, many multiple studies on this. I want you to do the research for yourself. I want you to just literally type this in if you want, because it's out there and it's no one's keeping it from you. Sure, the media and American Medical Association and all that, they're not going to tell you it, but they're not keeping it a secret. They're just not telling you it. It's out there if you want to search for it. And that's where every day on the Cabral Concept, I'm trying to bring these things to you, because the triggering of glucocorticoids, which is, again, glucocorticoids are produced when cortisol starts to get triggered, and that's the body's really last part of the fight or flight, begins to break down the brain. It really does. It's like literally systematically begins to burn out brain cells. So that's when the short-term memory starts to go, and then eventually all the memory, right? Eventually the brain cannot signal, because really when you're talking about dementia and you're talking about Alzheimer's, I did a 3-part series on it. So if you want to know literally a full overview of Alzheimer's, there's a 3-part series I did, and you can simply go to stevencabral.com/podcasts and just type in Alzheimer's in the search bar, and you'll find it. And again, 3-part series, everything you really want to know. So let's keep it to that for today. If you suffer from any one of those 7, this is a serious sign that stress is beginning to accumulate in your body. What I want you to do then at that point is begin to look at what are all the main sources of stress in your life, and we have to begin to reduce those. I've done many shows on how to reduce stress, and I will be back, of course, in the future with more shows on how to reduce stress. So definitely stay tuned each and every day. And then the one show that I want you to tune back into as well is episode 788. Because if you didn't listen to 788 and you don't know what that little crease means on your earlobe, you have to check that out. That's only one of the 10 telltale signs of a coming disease. And again, you can find all episodes at stevencabral.com/podcasts. So hopefully today's show was helpful. As always, if it was, please do feel free to pass it along with anyone else you believe it could serve. Did you know that the body really only becomes sick or imbalanced in only 2 ways? Over time, you become deficient in vital nutrients, and you also accumulate toxins internally and from the environment. As those nutrients diminish and you increase your total toxic load, your body then begins to show the first signs of dis-ease. It's actually quite predictable, and the good news is that if we know how you began to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, we also know how to empty it to begin the healing process. I was fortunate enough to learn this ancient healing process from my mentor after suffering from debilitating diseases for close to a decade. It was only when I began to implement these techniques did I finally overcome my illnesses and go on to live a life of energy and vitality that I now enjoy. I'd like to share with you now what I discovered after traveling all over the world and how to combine the best of ancient healing wisdom with state-of-the-art science. Allow me to teach you exactly how I've been able to help over 250,000 people to empty their rain barrel and begin to transform their body and lives into what they've always hoped they could be. To get your copy of the international bestseller, The Rain Barrel Effect, simply go to stevencabral.com/rainbarrel.